Okay, good, the mic is on. So listen, somehow I got stuck with the last speaking slot on the day after the pub crawl, so I figure you guys are pretty much as shattered as I am. I do have a solid 45 minutes of talk, and hopefully I can get you all through, but I'm wondering, I have a statistics project that I'm working on, and I think I can kill two birds with one stone if you help me out. And so what I need you all to do is stand up, everybody stand up. All right, get the blood flowing at least. And I want you to think of a couple of numbers. You can choose either 0, 1, or 2. Okay, don't tell anybody what it is, just in your head, 0, 1, or 2. And then if your number is 0, and don't put your hands up yet, right? But if your number is 0, your hand position is going to be like this. And if your number is 1, your hand position will be about shoulder width like this. And if your number is 2, it's going to be pretty wide, okay? Don't put your hands up yet. When I say go, you think of the number that you had, and I want you to put up that hand position and then leave it there, okay? So go. Now leave it there. Okay, wait, hold on a second here. All right, excellent. So shake it out, and sit down. Actually, there was no statistics project. It's just that I bet my daughter that I could get a standing ovation. So we've got like, yeah. Okay. So I got clean dishes for a whole month. It's awesome. So okay, let's go in. So my name is Eric Tachibana. And I run the AWS Professional Services practices for Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and India. And if you're not familiar with professional services, you can kind of think of it like this. Is basically, we work with our partners to help enterprise customers accelerate through their cloud transformation journeys. And along that way, so over the last many years, we've been involved with hundreds of enterprise transformations, and when you do that, when you're in the trenches kind of working through these transformation programs, you see a lot of patterns, right? So not software design patterns, but these are transformation, organizational change patterns. And certainly, I think tomorrow there's a presentation on the Cloud Adoption Framework, which I encourage all of you guys to go to, and that represents a lot of the patterns that we've seen. But I have a different pattern that I want to talk about today, and that pattern is called the Great Stall. And in order to understand that, I want to tell you guys a story. And actually, I know statistically that many of you know this story because we've done the research with lots and lots of companies. So this is the story. So you do everything right. You get leadership buy-in, you put together a cloud enablement team or a cloud center of excellence, they define some standards, they figure out some really nice low-hanging fruit workloads that they're going to migrate over, they migrate them over, and everything is happy, it's a complete success. And then comes the next 6 months. And in the next 6 months, everything begins to slow down, right? The migrations slow down. Suddenly you get a whole bunch of other internal actors, finance, legal, procurement, compliance, all of these guys coming to you and creating new barriers and saying, slow down, stop, we don't like what we're seeing. And ultimately, your team morale and the momentum of your cloud team starts to deteriorate as well, right? So it's a very common story. In fact, over the last year, what I've been working on, particularly in Asia, although I did talk to customers globally, is I interviewed about 50 customers, 50 mature enterprise customers, and I talked to the CEOs and the CIOs, and I spoke with their partners, their vendors and their partners. I spoke with our professional services consultants. I even spoke with on-the-ground engineers, and kind of talked to them about what was actually happening. And in that process, what I did find is that this story is actually very common. In fact, 90% of the organizations that I spoke with experience stall. And that they experience it at some point in their whole transformation program. And worse yet, sometimes that stall could last 18, even 24 months long, right? That period where nothing progresses much further. They have the initial rush of starting everything out, and then it all kind of settles down into nothing. And that period, again, it can be quite long. With that said, there were 10% of the organizations that I did talk to that went straight through the stall. And within the 70%, within another 70% of that 90, they did stall, but they eventually broke through the stall, which is good news, right? So they were able to do it. And so again, over the last year, what I did is I spoke with all of these companies and I tried to document. I'm too short for this, and now I can see you. Okay, so I spoke to all of these companies and I tried to document the best practices that they were using to kind of break through that stall. And so in the next 45 minutes, what I'd like to do is just simply share with you the results of the market research that I did, talk about the 10 lessons that I learned. Hopefully they will be very relevant to you. As I've gone out and shared these with other customers, it does seem like this particular way of looking at it does resonate very well. So as I mentioned, most transformations in the field are going to experience some form of stall. And by stall, I'm saying that the speed of migration basically slows down or it stops entirely. So you get some workloads migrated, but then after that, everything kind of stops along the way. And in fact, when we're looking at the data, so again, 50 companies that I interviewed, only 10% of them accelerated through the stall and had no problem. And I'm going to talk to you later about their magic or what the things they did right well. But actually, I'm more interested in this 70%. So 70% of the firms that we talked to, again, they did everything right. They had the team. They had the leadership support. They get about 10 to 20% of their capacity workload migrated over, and then suddenly, bam, they hit this stall, and they can't go further, right? And then, of course, you have the last group, the 20%, who basically never recover from that stall at all. That's the sad state. And you'll look at them, and maybe 2 or 3 years later, they'll still have a cloud program, they'll still have a cloud strategy, but they've just gotten nowhere. And you can often recognize them because they'll have similar types of characteristics. So one is they'll be arguing forever about their hybrid strategy approach. Another thing they'll be doing is they'll be forever trying to write their standards on cloud orchestration. And another one will be they will have decided to do one giant data center migration all at once, and then never getting anywhere with any of it. So the 20% that basically never escape the stall, you can kind of recognize them by those features. But today, I actually don't want to talk at all about the 20%. I actually want to focus on the 70%, because I think that's where most of you guys in the audience are. No raising hands, but statistically speaking, I kind of know that that's true. So enough depressing talk. I want to talk about what should the ideal case look like. And the ideal case should look like an S-curve, a classic S-curve. And at the beginning of this S-curve, you're going to put in a lot of effort. You have to write your business case, you have to do your total cost of ownership analysis, convince the board to give you budget, you have to choose a first few set of workloads. Oh, I forgot to mention, you have to create a cloud enablement team, right, a cloud center of excellence to actually execute all this. You have to choose your workloads and migrate them through. And the sad fact about this is, I think we all know this, is that actually you get very little business return during this phase. But that shouldn't be surprising because look, this is geometry. S-curves start off slow, so you have to put in a lot of work and you get very little return. What you're looking for is past the tipping point, because in the S, there's that magical tipping point or the inflection point at which the beginning of that process moves into the high acceleration phase, right? Acceleration, that's what ProServe is about. We're supposed to be helping you get to and manage the acceleration part of the S. That's the exciting part. That's where everybody gets bonus, improvements to their bonuses, right? So in that phase, what you see is that migrations start to happen very, very fast, and it doesn't take as much work as it did to make those migrations happen. And better yet, the other business units around the organization are starting to say, hey, I really like what they're doing over there. I like that. I can see that. I want some of that reduced cost. I want some of that agility. I want some of that improved security controls and improved governance. IT, come here and give me that, right? So at that point, we're really moving through the acceleration. And then at the very end, at the final part of the S-curve, of course, things slow down again, right? Because, well, one, you've actually migrated all of the workload, so there's really no workload to migrate over at that point. And you'll also run into those, super intractable, oh, this is a mainframe application. It'll be the really tough things that actually require major refactoring. So that's kind of the natural cycle. That would be, to me, the ideal transformation if we could see that from happening. Now, what do we really see? In the real world, this is what we see. So this is a set of 8 customers from Asia that I worked with. And by the way, these are completely representative of everybody else. I just chose 8 because I didn't want to have too many slides for you guys to look at. But what you can see clearly here is that the stall it's almost always happening, right? So I tried to circle the red. See, customer 1, 9 months during that stall period. Customer 2, 18 months during that stall. That's a long time to be in a stall. But if you kind of average this slide out, there's some serious time that happens in the stall. But there's also some good stories, right? So customer number 1 and customer number 5, you see that actually they eventually kind of got back on the right track and started escalating straight up that S-curve the way they were supposed to do. And by the way, this research was done about 8 months ago, and at least I can tell you now it was a happy ending for customer 1 and 5, and they actually were able to break out of that stall completely. So they got straight back on the S-curve, and they've been doing quite well. So I'm from Singapore, so I'm Asia-based, which is why that slide is there. But I did the exact same thing for global companies, right? Many of them are actually here at re:Invent, but I still can't say who they are. But what you see is it's exactly the same kind of situation that we have. Stall, stall, stall. 9-month, 18-month, 12 months. These are long, serious stalls. And by the way, for the data geeks out there, the y-axis is actually something called a Cheerio score, which is an internal measure that we use to understand how an account is growing. And so it's an amalgamation of a whole bunch of different variables, like the complexity of the account, the number of services used, the different types of services used, et cetera, right? But it's the best, it's a proxy. It's not a perfect representation of growth in transformation, but it's as best as I can get data for. And it's a pretty good approximation when you actually do qualitative interview-based feedback and talk to the people about it. Okay, so again, when you look at that, my focus, obviously, I don't really mind the 10%, right? These guys have it nailed. They're going through totally. The 20%, maybe lost cause, I don't know. But if I spend all my time with the poor 20%, I may use up all my consulting hours and not make much progress. So I've been thinking my focus needs to be on the 70%. How can I help that 70% either, 1, not go into a stall, or 2, if I can take an 18-month stall and turn it into a 4-month stall, that's a big deal. I mean, it's really a big deal. If you think about the amount, let's think about your 2-year budget for cloud transformation. How much is that? Now multiply that number by the number of enterprises at re:Invent today, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars thrown down the toilet just in delayed transformation costs, right? With your cloud transformation budgets, you're spending on training, you're spending on consultancy, you're spending on all sorts of things related to pushing that transformation. And if that transformation stalls, then you get 0 return on that investment, which means you may have well just, from a treasury perspective, invested all of that money in CDs or treasury bills, right? I mean, it's not delivering what you actually need to be delivering. So then the question is, right, the key question for me is, well, what if we could actually escape that stall? So in talking to all of these companies, what if there is some magic formulas that we can use to ensure that, again, those 70%, maybe not all of the 70%, maybe just 50% of the 70% I can save from the stall. That's already going to be a huge amount of value to our customers. And the nice thing about it is that there's actually good news, and that if we think about what's required to bust a change management stall, there are fantastic tools that exist in the world today that are proven. Now, they don't come from where you think they come from. In fact, the problem is that if I think about IT change management as a discipline, and I know that I look very young, but I'm actually quite old, and I've seen 25 years of IT change management, and I will tell you, I've gone through ITIL certification and PMI certification, so I know change management. But if I look back honestly at the last 30 years, well, it hasn't worked very well. I mean, we all use one of those frameworks or another, right? We have to, because there's nothing better out there to use within IT management change. But if we look at the success of change management projects as a community, we can't give ourselves an A, that's for sure. But strangely, as I'm talking to these customers about their change transformations, specifically the 10% that made it straight through and didn't stall at all, I started realizing actually there is a framework that they're talking about which has nothing to do with change management, and that is a book called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. Sadly, this is a marketing textbook. If you get an MBA, you'll have this as assigned reading in your marketing course, but too many of us IT professionals don't take that course, and so we never are exposed to this particular book. And of course, by the way, it's available on this particular e-commerce bookseller that I know of, right? So you can buy it, in fact, in e-form, and then you can read it on the plane back. It's a very easy book to read. So Crossing the Chasm is not about IT change management. Actually, Crossing the Chasm is about how consumer products are sold in mass consumer markets. How are you able to sell products in mass markets? And the first thing that Geoffrey Moore in the book brings out, the first most important idea is that S-curves are actually a natural law of product markets. If you look at any successful product, and you look here, here's some color TVs and air conditioners, computers, they actually all fall into S-curves, the same one that we showed before about the cloud transformation stuff. They're all falling into S-curves. And if you think about your own businesses out there, and you think about what are the cash cows, the cash cows of your particular business, I guarantee you that they will fall into an S-curve form in terms of how they have been adopted into markets. But Moore had a second really interesting observation. And that observation is that if you think of the S-curve as basically I'm selling my product, right? Underneath that sales curve, there's a bell curve of buyers. There's those actual people who are buying the product, which is driving your product up that S-curve. And what's interesting about those buyers is there's different categories. So if you think about the very beginning of the S-curve, it kind of relates to a certain type of buyer called innovators. And further along, as you move towards the inflection point, you start selling to a different category of buyers, and those are the early adopters. And of course, the really sweet spot when you hit that acceleration, those guys are your early majority. And then there's the late majority and laggards, but we don't want those. That's the depressing part of the curve, right? So I'm not going to talk about those guys now. But it's those innovators, early adopters, and early majority that are driving the key part of that S-curve in Moore's world. So first idea is S-curves are real. They're a natural law. Idea 2 is S-curves are defined by buyers that fall into a bell curve. Idea 3 is that each of these buying categories, the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, the laggards, they all buy differently. What they buy is different, why they buy is different, when they buy, who they buy from, where they buy, everything about how these segments in the market buy is different, right? And that's a really important observation because these differences in the buying group create crises in the adoption of any particular product. So there's these multiple cracks through which a company can fall through. If a company is not able to go from innovators to early adopters, they fall through a crack and they go bankrupt. The big one, the most important one, is called the chasm. And the chasm occurs between the early adopters and the early majority. And that is so critical because actually in Moore's study, he realized that a huge percent of companies would fall through this crack because they do very well selling to the innovators, they do great selling to the early adopters, and they never figure out how to sell to the early majority. And the early majority, remember, that's the sweet part of the S-curve. If you can't get to that part, your product is a complete failure. So that's no good. So the chasm, it's occurring because the early majority and the early adopters are so very different in how they buy. And let's talk a little bit more about that. So if you think about the early adopters, right? These guys are probably, I would say they're visionaries. They actually love tech. They love tech. But they're not in it for the sake of tech. These guys, where the innovators are probably the propeller heads. They just love messing around with the new tech. Early adopters actually are business savvy. They actually care about how can I take this new invention or idea and apply it to a business to make it better, right? And as a result, they're looking for disruption. They're looking for the best, the biggest, the newest, the fastest. They're looking for things that are going to allow them to disrupt an existing business. And it makes sense given the psychology of this person, right? The psychology of the person is that, they're not adopting tech for the sake of technology. What they want to do is they want to actually go into a business and completely change it. They want to disrupt it. They want to be they're actually comfortable being the first one out who's going to make a name for themselves by taking this new disruptive idea and making sweeping changes to the business. I posit that if you are at reInvent in this session, you are probably an early adopter by psychology. Now, of course, some non-early adopters certainly could have slipped in by accident into this session and they're trying to figure out how to get out really quickly, but I think most of them are you. So you're probably business savvy. You're actually thinking not just about technology, but you're thinking about the business and how do I make the business better. But at the same time, you're still a geek, right? You go to family picnics and weddings and you're the guy singled out to ask the technology questions, right? That's you. That's early adopter is typically going to be that sort of a person. But again, you're looking for changing the business. Now, the early majority is very different in psychology. The early majority is actually kind of pragmatist. They actually like the status quo. Generally, they're doing pretty well in their current job. They like what they're doing. They've been doing it for a while. They're getting credit. They're being recognized for doing a good job. And they understand how things work today, and they like that. And so they have very different buying considerations. So they're looking for hardcore standards. They're looking for products that have huge install bases and it's very safe. They're looking for case studies which are exactly relevant to the work that they're doing at the current moment. They're looking for great support. They're looking for cheap products. You know the early majority, right? And what's interesting about these two groups, right, the early majority and the early adopter is, they're not only different, but I think you can see now that they're in conflict, actually. They're misaligned in terms of what they actually want in life and career. I mean, you can have an early adopter and an early majority and be total buddies and go out for drinking and play golf and all that, but professionally, you're not quite friends, actually, right? Because you're trying to do different things. So what does this all mean to you guys? Well, what I've seen in the research is that managers in enterprises behave the exact same way that consumers in consumer markets do. So actually, everything that you can get out of Crossing the Chasm, which has been proven for many, many years, if you go to get a marketing degree, you have to read this book, right? It's a very important book. But the great stall that we've been seeing in AWS Enterprise Cloud Adoption Transformations is exactly the Moore's Chasm. It's the same thing. It's happening for the same exact reasons. And if you want to accelerate through the great stall, you need to understand Crossing the Chasm. And what was fantastic to me is I'm talking to all of these CIOs, right? They're talking to me about the problems and solutions that they have. They don't know the words of Crossing the Chasm, but they are telling me the story of Crossing the Chasm exactly. So I want to go through 10 things, 10 ideas that kind of came out of the research, which I hope will be non-intuitive. I hope, if anything, you guys will come out of here and say, actually, I hadn't thought of it in that way before, but it's a really good way. So hopefully these will be non-intuitive best practices. So let's start with one. So one is simply admitting that you have a problem and that the rules of the game have changed, right? So far what's happened is you've done a very good job with your initial program, with getting leadership support, migrating workloads, getting them to work, pulling the team together. You will have done a great job so far. Let's assume that that is the case. But now you hit the chasm. And you're a rock star, right? You've just come off of 6 to 9 months of doing everything that you are supposed to be doing. And what's the natural reaction is, well, that's worked so far, so let's keep doing exactly what we've been doing because it's worked so well. And this is the key problem about the chasm because what works in the early adopter phase is the opposite for what's going to work in the early majority stage. So if you keep doing what you've done before, they say what's gotten you here is not what's going to get you there. That's the idea, Michael Goldsmith. So the idea here is that you need to kind of reset your mind and realize that the rules of the game are about to change. As you move into that early adopter, early majority phase, you've got to challenge yourself. One of the best tactics that I've seen from some of the organizations, I was working with one particular organization in the Philippines, is to do a lean UX persona. And I think most of you won't know what a lean UX persona is, right? Because again, it's kind of coming from the marketing discipline. But basically, it's a workshop. It's a workshop where you define what a customer segment wants, needs, fears, the constraints they have, the worries they have, the hopes and dreams that they have, really understanding a new segment so that you can really separate the old guys from the new guys. Now, if you don't know how to run a workshop like that, go to your marketing department, because I guarantee, especially if you have a digital marketing department, I guarantee you they have people on staff who do user personas as part of the marketing efforts all day long, and they can help you run that. If you don't, certainly AWS Professional Services, we can, and of course, you go to any of the strategic consulting style partners, they should be able to help you do that as well. Usually this is kind of a 1 or a 2-day exercise. It's actually not a huge deal, but the learning that you get out of it is fantastic. The other thing you might do is just Google user persona and then select images, and then you'll see like 500,000 versions of user personas that other companies have done, and then you can kind of copy that framework. Okay, so number 2, and number 2 is a little bit more scary for you guys because I think most of you guys are coming from cloud enablement teams. And rule number 2 is kind of this, is that sadly, you all need to switch out. The thing here is that I come from a startup background, so the first 15 years of my life was in startups before I ended up in banks and eventually in Amazon. And in my startup world, there's another common design which we all know about as founders, because I was a founder. And the idea is this, is that founders can be excellent CEOs for the first 3 years. Because founders have a certain personality type which is really good at starting things up, being innovative, breaking rules, no fear of failure, all of that stuff. But then a startup, if you think of the startup as a life form, it has a life cycle, and there is a startup phase, but then there's a high growth phase, and then eventually there's an exit phase where you're talking IPO or trade sales. And across the board, right, there will be a few exceptions, right? Okay, so there certainly are a few exceptions, but generally speaking, founders need to switch out about halfway through the growth stage because they need to bring in professional management, which is good and has the right psychology for the exit stage or for the second half of the high growth phase. If you try to have one founder go through all of those life cycles, you're kind of asking for a unicorn or a Superman because nobody has all of those skills. Nobody can be, super hands-on creative and then be as equally relevant in a board meeting with, VCs and all of the rest of it. So in the startup community, we do see this a lot where the founder starts as CEO, but the company asks the CEO, not that the company can say anything, but the company says, I need somebody other than you for this next phase in my life, right? And the same thing is true of a cloud enablement team. So at the very beginning, of course, we want innovators and early adopters to be part of the team because they're going to have all the passion that's needed to go through those first few months where you're fighting against the world. But the early majority will see that team, and they all know you, right? Even in big companies, they all know who you are, and they'll be thinking, it's that guy. I know that guy. I don't like that guy. He puts my bonus at risk. He's the one that's talking in the ear of the CIO and the ear of the CEO, putting all this disruptive ideas in their heads. That guy is dangerous. So it kind of sets up a weird dynamic, and if you try to sell to the early majority with that team, it can oftentimes cause trouble and just make that sales process much, much harder. So I'm not saying that everybody in the cloud enablement team has to leave the cloud enablement team once you get into the early majority stage. Actually, you need a lot of that knowledge, right? There's going to be a huge amount of earned experience that the cloud enablement team has that you have to carry forward. But what I am saying is that you need to bring in new members, right? And I would say try to look strategically into the early majority community. Look at the managers who you think are the most influential early majority managers. Find people on their teams and somehow get those people to be on the cloud enablement team because they will have the ear of the politically important people that you want to go after, and they'll be seen as a friend. Like the other early majority people will look to that person as like them. And it's a much easier sell when you have like sell to like. At the same time, though, like I said, you can't just ditch your whole cloud enablement team, right? You guys have to actually deliver, and your legacy folks know how to do that. What I want you to do, though, is just change the spotlight. So I want whoever was the cloud enablement team lead, perhaps it's time, right? They just need to take a step back out. Spotlight is everywhere here, so I can't do that. But take a step back out of the spotlight and allow the new team member to come in and represent that team, because it makes it a much easier, a safer sell to the other early majority buyers out there in the organization. At the same time, after about 6 to 9 months, maybe let's say 1 year of cloud enablement team participation, those people are very high, are excellent, excellent folks to poach. So you have to be very careful, right? Because if you've been in a large enterprise cloud enablement team for a year, people want to hire you, right? So if you're in that enterprise, you need to figure out ways, and it's not always monetary incentives that we're talking about, but you need to find ways to keep those guys in the team, because you can't lose all of that knowledge that you've built up over the first 12 months. The other aspect is, well, they still may leave. So you have to, at this point, in order to stop the stall from happening, you've got to cross-train, and you have to get the knowledge that these guys have learned in the trenches over to the new people who are joining the team. And that has to be an explicit and important part of your management style for the cloud enablement teams. Otherwise, you will lose skills that is just simply too expensive to rebuild. All right, so first thing, accept that the rules of the game are changing. 2, it's time to switch out some of your team members and change the team dynamic. The third thing is now we have to figure out what we're going to go after. And there's this, in Crossing the Chasm, he calls it a beachhead. And the idea of beachhead actually comes from World War II. So I know you guys have probably seen Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers or something like this. So you kind of know the history of World War II. And in World War II, when the Allies landed in Europe, they landed at the beaches of Normandy. They landed at one particular spot, and they went after the beaches. So beachhead strategy actually literally comes from military strategy and the beaches of Normandy. And the question about it is, well, why at Normandy and not everywhere? Why didn't they land troops up and down the coast of Europe from, all the way from Italy to Denmark? I don't know, you could land 1 troop for every mile or something like that. Why didn't they do that? Why did they concentrate all efforts on one place? And then the second question is, well, why was it Normandy? So let's look, the first question is, I think will be obvious to everybody, which is that you focus all of your attention on one single beachhead because you don't want to lose in many small battles. It's much better to win in one big battle, consolidate that victory, and move forward. That's much stronger than just trying too many things and losing at every single one of them. The second question is more interesting, right? The second question is, well, why did they go after Normandy? If you think about it, actually a lot of soldiers died at Normandy. It wasn't particularly a low-hanging fruit, right? When you think of migration strategy and what should be my first workload that I go after, you don't go after Normandy, right? That wouldn't be one that you would immediately think, ooh, that's the one I want to, I'd like to see lots of DevOps blood in the water. No, you don't say that, right? So why not Portugal? Listen, Portugal, there was no defense there, right? There wasn't going to be any German soldiers there with machine guns. In fact, there was a neutral country and a huge mountain range in between Portugal and the rest of continental Europe. So that would have been a really nice low-hanging fruit. They definitely would have won in Portugal. But the problem is then what? What do you do then? You're stuck in the wrong place. So yes, you have made a victory, but you have nowhere to go from there. And the same thing is true in an organization. If, as you're figuring out your beachhead when you're trying to work out your migration strategy, if you're only thinking about low-hanging fruit in terms of what's the easiest thing that we can go after, the lowest risk, a simple 3-tier application that requires no refactoring, it's a business owner that already loves us and will be happy to support that project. These are very common reasons why we choose our first migration workload, right? The danger of that is that you end up in the equivalent of Portugal, and you have nowhere to go next. So you might win that first victory, and you spend a lot of effort to win that first victory, and then suddenly the stall happens, because you did win, but you won the wrong battle. what you need to do in order to help with that is actually go through a structured process of understanding your beachhead strategy. And that's like a 1 or 2 day workshop. It's not a big deal. Again, bring in professional services, bring in one of our AWS partners, or even for a beachhead strategy, you could bring in any kind of a consultancy, because this is actually pretty bread and butter for consultancies. But it's something I tell you that IT departments do not do. They do not do a proper beachhead strategy, and they constantly choose the wrong beachhead, and then they're stuck in Portugal. I hope there's no one from Portugal that I'm offending. It's a nice place. Okay, after that, right? So we kind of already set this up, is that after we choose the beachhead, obviously we need to then move on to the next battles, the next few workloads. And these we call bowling pins. So if you can imagine, I can't draw it, but if the beachhead is here, what you don't do in military strategy, if you land at Normandy, the next thing you don't do is send paratroopers to Yugoslavia, because they're completely on separate areas. They don't have supply chain support. They're stuck without any help whatsoever. No, you don't do that. You take consecutive areas that are right next to the ones that you've already conquered. So if you kind of think of it like this, it kind of looks like bowling pins. That's why they call it bowling pin strategy. The point that I want to make about this one, and again, all I want you guys to do is actually spend explicit time doing a bowling pin strategy, where you talk about what are the next workloads after our beachhead that we want to target. And the only thing I want to say here, because I know we only have so much time, is don't try to boil the ocean. So a lot of companies, when they're talking about their migration plan, we're in that first meeting and they say, oh, we're targeting 100 to 250 workloads that we would like to move over in the next 6 months. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to do, because really, if you think, again, that's like saying as the Allies attacking 100 or 250 cities at the same time. It's simply too much for a small tag team of people to do, right? Realistically speaking, migrating a workload when you're still learning, it's not going to take less than 6 weeks. Right? Just organizing it, writing the plan, making mistakes, all of the stuff that will naturally happen. Just a single workload, it takes 6 weeks at the beginning, right? Later on, when we're at the height of the S-curve and you can bring in migration tools like Racemi and things like that, okay, you can migrate thousands of workloads at a time. But at the beginning, when you're at the beginning, you can't. So what I would say is try to limit yourself to maybe no more than 5 or 10. Like, get that bowling pin workshop going and force your team to prioritize down to the right 5 or 10. Don't do 50, 100, 200 at once. Okay, so we've had rules of the game are changing. We've had got to change the team. We've had beachhead and bowling pin. And the next thing we need to think about is recommunication. So I bet most cloud enablement teams, or most, you guys out there, you don't have a formal communications plan of how you're going to roll out this change. And that's actually fundamental from ITIL and PMBOK and ADCAR, these communication plan where you kind of list out all of the stakeholders you want to communicate to, you define the think, feel, and do goals, and then you figure out the right media that you're going to communicate to them. Most IT transformation teams don't do that at all, which is a shame. They definitely should. However, that doesn't mean that you don't have a marketing position. You're definitely sending out particular messages. You definitely are sending out emails. You have meetings. You have shared vocabulary and that you use in order to talk about the cloud transformation. So even if it's planned or not, you do have a communications plan. It's better if you actually explicitly do one, but don't think that just because you haven't done one, it doesn't exist. It will grow organically. You will have a communications plan organically, and that can be quite dangerous. But the thing about the communications plan is that you have to remember, what worked for the early adopters is totally not going to work for the early majority. And one very common difference is early adopters love vision. Think back to the psychology of the early adopters that we talked about before. They love vision. They love how we're going to change the business. They love what disruption is going to allow them to do. Early majorities, value proposition. Or if you just listen to their talk, you will hear these guys, the 2 V's of miscommunication. You will hear them talking vision, 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 value proposition, value proposition, value proposition, and they do not meet, right? They don't meet. And if you try to sell an early majority person on vision, they're going to be like blah blah blah. I've heard it all before. Just tell me how much money we can make, right? So if you have a communications plan or patterns that you've grown accustomed to, which is about selling vision, and I guarantee you guys, that's what you guys are selling on, because that's the right thing to sell on for early adopters. And if you carry that forward and give the same speech, the same words, the same marketing collateral, the websites and the sales documents and all of this stuff, you carry that forward to the early majority, total failure. It will not work at all. They will run away from you as fast as they possibly can. So at this stage, my advice, the companies that are able to resist the stall, they actually throw out their entire communications plan at this point and redo everything, right? They redo the vision statement of the team, they redo the values of the team, they redo the marketing collateral, like how they send out email, how they do monthly reporting, all their dashboards, all of that changes vis-a-vis the user persona for the early majority that they were able to come up with, so that they have communications that speaks to the audience in the way that's impactful for them. The next one, which is kind of similar, is actually you think about the 4 Ps of marketing. That was publicity, and now we talk about the product. The product offering itself also has to change. Early adopters, they actually like to hack. They like products that are 85, 90% done, because actually in early adopter psychology, they enjoy playing with the product a little bit and customizing it, taking it home and working with it. They don't want to build it. They're not innovators, but they like to mess around with it. They have fun doing that. And in fact, they like to search, hunt, and find. That's a fun activity for an early adopter. For early a majority person, that's anathema. They definitely don't want to do any of that stuff. They want point, click, and buy. They don't want anything more complex than that. So now you're thinking about your offering, and your offering is whatever cloud services that you're proposing for the rest of the organization. When you were selling to early adopters, it was okay to say, here's this cool thing that we're working on, there's the documentation, you can go read it, and then we'll help from time to time. That's actually a very fine way to sell to early adopters. They like that. They can go discover, read the documentation on their commute, get excited, and then they get to go in and get their hands dirty and install it. If you try to give that kind of an offering to an early majority person, obviously you know already, right? They're going to hate that, right? They actually want something where it just says, give me a button to click on that will deploy and will take care of all of that stuff for me. I don't even want to know how it works. An early majority psyche thinks about the product offering differently. And what you need to do at this point is, you will have made lots of assumptions about what your service offering should be. You will have made a lot of assumptions, either explicitly, like you had put into a plan, or organically. This is just how it has grown up. But you will have made a lot of assumptions, and you will have tried a lot of things. If we think about lean enterprise, you would have done some experiments, and you would have tried things out, and you would have pivoted or persevered, and you would have come up with a product offering. But now as you hit the early majority, what you have to do again, which is sad because you just put a lot of work into this, you have to throw that all away. And you have to rethink your product offering so that you're creating something that the new customer wants. And sometimes that means removing features that you actually loved. Sometimes it means adding features that you think are completely stupid, right? But the customer wants that. And so what I encourage you guys to do, and I think we do have a lean enterprise presentation, is pick up a book on, actually pick up Lean Startup by Eric Ries, is even better than the Lean Startup, Lean Enterprise book, and read through that and understand how you use MVPs and use experimentation to reposition products so that they speak more directly to the customer segments you're going after, which is the early majority in your organization. So, right, we had the rules of the games are changing. You got to change your team. You got to figure out your beachhead. You got to figure out your bowling pins. You have to re-communicate, and you have to reprioritize your offering or redesign your offering. So that's 6. So we're doing well, and I'm a little bit behind time, but we'll be okay. The next thing you need to look at is the ecosystem. So the early majority ecosystem is very different. When you were in the early adopter phase and you were talking about migrating over a few workloads and you had business sponsors who actually liked you and were very helpful, at that point, a good cloud enablement technology head could kind of go around legal and go around procurement. I know you guys did that. Okay, it's okay. That's normal. That's how the early adopters actually are able to achieve some of the disruption, is by breaking rules, right? That's what early adopters do. Early majority, however, that no longer stands. You cannot break rules in the early majority phase because these guys are the pragmatists. They want to make sure that you're doing everything in the right way. So suddenly, procurement, finance, legal, compliance, risk, all of these guys suddenly take a much bigger interest in what you guys are doing. If you haven't set up those relationships 4 months earlier or 6 months earlier, that absolutely creates the stall, because it takes 6, 9, 12 months to actually get all of these other organizational actors on board, and just simply training them, simply getting rid of all of the fake things, the FUD that's out there, which is making them say that the cloud is not secure, when obviously that's silly, right? So, but you need to have time to do that, and if you don't start that early, you will end up going into a 12-month stall while you're running in circles with all of these actors. So it's critical that these ecosystem actors, you bring them in early to the team. I actually think that when you're forming your original cloud enablement team, you should have a steering committee which includes finance, includes procurement, includes legal and risk, and you have single points of contact inside your cloud enablement team which face off directly to each of these organizations to at least keep them on board and let them know things are happening. Because otherwise, the reality is, if you're in finance, all your day is in fire drills, and even if the CEO has said cloud is an important thing, your daily life is fire drills, and you will forget that there's a cloud enablement program happening. And so you can't let that happen. You have to engage them all of the way. And it's more than just that, right? I mean, if I just think about finance alone, the amount of time that it takes to integrate, it would be great if you could just use the AWS Finance Console and get your reports from there, but we know in reality, enterprises have some kind of global core financial system that's used by many, many departments, and it's a hybrid situation. It can't just be the cloud. So what's critical here is that you have to be able to integrate into that financial system. The worst thing that can happen is for a business leader to come in and say, here's my report from finance, and it says X dollars, and here's my report from AWS, and it says Y dollars. So something is wrong, clearly AWS is lying, and it's more expensive than they said, or something like that, right? So that's the worst thing that can happen in a program where you end up with finance having multiple different stories. So again, that integration into the finance backend system will take 6 to 9 months, maybe 12 months to do. If you don't front load that, like you're working on the migrating a workload, that's fine. But if you're not working on migrating finance, you're going to be in trouble 6 to 12 months down the line. Another really important one is partners. In Asia, most of our enterprise customers are heavily leveraged. Sometimes 90% of their application development is actually done by vendors who are providing that application development service or who are managing their entire infrastructure, right? And partners are like you. It will take a partner a year to transform themselves, one, maybe to create their software as a service, or just to get used to how do they manage within a cloud situation. And again, if you surprise them and say, hey, tomorrow we're going to be moving over to the cloud, they're going to be in trouble. They simply won't be able to keep up with your needs. So it's very important as an ecosystem player, bring those partners in very early. And don't be mean. Tell them, listen, we're going to move to the cloud and we want you to come with us, and we'll give you 12 months to do it, but you're going to have to do it. And just don't surprise them and just one day say, you have to go cloud right away and we're going to cut all your profit margin. So So number 8 is actually something that I think will come from ITIL and PMI and all the rest of it, is you've just got to keep communicating the wins. It's so easy in an organization to simply forget, because everybody is running around trying to complete fire drills, trying to get their work done. It's so easy to forget how far we're coming. And so it's very important in terms of the stall that you keep the momentum going just through marketing, right? And you just got to keep communicating win, 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 win. We had one of our customers in Asia, at every single town hall, there would be 10 minutes on the Cloud First program. And they had a lot of really, really big financial impact programs, but he was very disciplined. Every time, Cloud First, Cloud First, Cloud First has to be in every single town hall. And so you make sure that you continue to have that communications plan and that you're driving that out all the time. Along with that, listen, is you have to keep driving leadership. Leaders have to stay engaged. They have to be visible. We had a great one, another one of my customers in the Philippines. It's kind of a funny story, right? So when we first rolled out certification, so they certified hundreds of their internal developers on AWS. And when they did that, their CEO and CIO sat in and attended and got certified too. Right? This is a big company, right? And I've been back, probably half a dozen times across a year and a half. And even today, when I meet new people who weren't even employed back then, this is the story they tell. Our CEO so-and-so is an AWS certified developer. So it has merged into the folklore of that company. The fact that the CEO is so committed that they're going to spend time in the trenches with everybody and learning these stuff. I can't express how important it is to have that visibility. It's not just about making a statement, we will be cloud first, or we will be all in cloud. It's not enough to just make that statement. You have to be visible on a day-to-day basis. And then there's the last bit, which we all forget about, is that we're running around, we're trying to migrate, and actually we as project teams are doing a lot of manual work in all of this process. But what happens, we have to remember that at the beginning of the S, it makes sense that things are slow and manual and painful, because that's part of an S-curve. That S-curve, at the beginning, it is like that. But we have to remember that 12 months from now, if all goes well, we're going to be in the vertical part of the S. And in the vertical part of the S, we go from migrating 10, 20, 30 apps to migrating 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 apps. So if we still, as a project team, we're not talking about AWS as a DevOps platform. I'm talking about our people, our project team, and how we manage our projects. If we're still manual about that, we will never be able to support that kind of scale that we need to really accelerate. So everything about how your cloud enablement team has to work must be about developing, automating us out of that equation so that the organization itself can go through that curve without us. So, get your people, all the people in the cloud enablement team, and as many people as you can, get them certified with DevSecOps, right? Make sure that they understand, how to automate and the beauty of automating on top of AWS. We've got several partners. So GE was one of the companies that I talked to, and they have something called the Bot Army, which is very much like Netflix the Simian Army. And these things are open source. So you can download them and use them. Why not? They work very well. A lot of companies have done so. So I would say just don't forget to automate your own project team. Okay, so summary, right? So rules have changed. Change the team members. Beachhead bowling pin. Reposition your communications. Rethink about your product offering. Work on the ecosystem. Communicate all your wins like crazy. Get that leadership. Make it persistent. Make it continue to happen. And automate, right? Those were the 10 principles that came out of the research. Again, I talked to 50 mature companies who had gone past that stall. And these are the 10 themes. If you can do this, I think you have a very good shot of breaking the stall yourself. And very fast, I know we're out of time, is really quick sales pitch. I got to do a little bit of sales pitch, right? So how can we help? One, when you're doing your lean personas, when you're doing your beachheads and your bowling pins, use consultants. That could be us, it could be other AWS partners, or it could be even other partners beyond that. Two is leverage customer-to-customer contacts. Talk a lot more, not just at reInvent, but listen, your account manager, you can call up your account manager and say, hey, can you introduce me to some other customers like me and set up a lunch or a coffee so we can just talk about our experiences? I bet most of you haven't done that, but I guarantee your account manager would love to allow that to happen. The only caveat is that when you get successful and your account manager calls you up and says, hey, will you talk to this newbie, you have to also go to that lunch. The third one is, broadly train. A few stars in this is not going to change an organization. You actually have to spread that out far and wide. And remember, especially in your cloud enablement team, is to cross-train all the people, because attrition is real. There will be a lot of poaching. We just accept that as the truth, as the reality, and we plan and we manage around it. But you got to invest in that stuff. And the last one is, for those of you that are heavily vendor leveraged, you really have to take a proactive position and help your vendors get onto the cloud. Make sure that you've given your AWS account manager the list of your top 10 vendors and where they need to make the transition to cloud, and also set up time for them to talk to each other. We had another excellent example from Asia where this organization set up a partner day, a whole day where they invited all of the partners down. They had us speak, they had their cloud enablement team speak, they had some of the partners speak, and they just made it clear that this company is going to be all in, and you can get on board or you don't have to get on board, but 12 months from now, no more RFPs will allow a non-cloud solution to come through our doors. So they made a very strong statement, but they're giving the partner team, the vendor team, lots of time to prepare and lots of help doing that. And remember that was a slide that somebody inserted. Remember to complete your evaluations. If you want to hire me, give me very low marks and I'll be on the market. But seriously, I will read these things in absolute detail. I'm very interested in your feedback. This is a new pattern that we're kind of looking at, so it's still in the market research, so I'm really looking forward to your feedback. And thank you guys. Again, my name is Eric Tachibana. On Facebook, I'm kind of closed in, but in LinkedIn, I'm a total slut. So if you guys contact me, I'm happy to, you can ask me questions anytime through that medium. And thanks you, 4:15 session. Wow, thank you guys.